The Alex Murdaugh story is a twisted tale of crime and privilege that only gets darker the more you look at it. This is everything we know and everything we still don't about this sordid true crime saga.
In 2019, 2 years before he was murdered by his father, Paul Murdaugh was involved in a deadly boating accident. The coast of South Carolina is popular with boaters, especially for people lucky enough to have a family island, as the Murdaughs did. In February 2019, Paul and a cohort of similarly underage friends decided to meet at Murdaugh Island and pregame before heading to a party on another nearby island via the Murdaugh family boat. After spending a few hours at the party, the group headed to the city of Beaufort to continue drinking on land, successfully being served in a bar. According to the other passengers, Paul was acting drunk and erratic, but as it was his family's boat, he still drove.
We had all made it a point to say to him, you need to let Connor drive or you need to let Anthony drive, but he wouldn't listen to anybody.
He alternated between driving in circles and fighting with his girlfriend until, at 2:20 a.m., the boat struck a bridge and passenger Mallory Beach was thrown from the craft. Beach's body was recovered from the water several days later, about 5 miles downstream from the crash site. Meanwhile, images of the boat show serious structural damage and a significant amount of blood on the floor. Paul's blood showed a high .24 blood alcohol level several hours after the incident, which is triple the legal limit. Paul was indicted for felony charges in Beach's death and injuries to other passengers, but died before facing trial. The story of the boat crash is fairly damning for Paul Murdaugh, but a lawsuit filed by survivor Connor Cook makes the rest of the family out to be complicit in Paul's wrongdoing. Per the court documents, Paul bought alcohol using his older brother Buster's ID and his mother's credit card, even though both knew he tended to drink to excess. After the boat crash, Alec may have tried to shift the blame from his son onto another passenger. At the hospital, Alec allegedly approached each survivor and told them to say they didn't know who had been driving the boat. Alec even hired an attorney for Cook, though that attorney turned out to be his old college buddy and Paul's godfather. The documents go on to allege that the Murdaughs tried to blame Cook himself for the crash, using their influence in a targeted rumor campaign to turn the community's focus on Cook instead of Paul. Cook had been told to be silent per this theory to avoid too many people hearing right away that Paul had been driving the boat.
This really is a case of institutional evil manifesting itself.
Cook withdrew the suits in 2024, leaving questions about the party's relative culpability formally unanswered. Alec and his wife Maggie had not been getting along at the time of the murders and were living apart, with Maggie holing up in the family beach house. So when her husband texted her to meet him at the family home in Islandton, about an hour from the beach house, Maggie didn't feel like going. She only agreed when Alec told her his father was dying and that this was her chance to say goodbye. Maggie countered with an offer to meet at the hospital, but no, Alec insisted she meet him at the Murdaugh home in Islandton so they could drive to the hospital together. Maggie vented in a text to a friend, calling Alex's behavior fishy, and granted, anyone who reads about the case quickly comes to feel that everything Alec does is fishy. But why was Maggie suspicious of him? And why did she go to the Islandton house against her better judgment? When she arrived, she left the car running, presumably expecting to leave again right away, but she never made it back to the car. Alec's scheme was even more sinister than she realized. Alec was an experienced prosecuting attorney who knew the South Carolina legal system inside and out. He knew, or should have known, what investigators would look for and at least some of the tools they could use to probe the murders and his involvement. However, even with his connections and experience, he was caught and convicted. And while that's good for the interests of justice and the safety of people who might pass into his orbit, it does raise the question of why the murders were so sloppy. Additionally, why was Murdaugh's defense so weak that the presiding judge went on the record to comment, "The evidence of guilt is overwhelming." Gun casings from the murders matched others found at the property, indicating that the murder weapon had been fired there before and was therefore likely a family gun. Murdaugh's voice appeared on a Snapchat video Paul took shortly before his death. Cell phone location data undercut his account of his movements. We can speculate that perhaps Alec wasn't thinking clearly due to his acknowledged opioid addiction, and perhaps the enormity of the crimes he planned. But until he sits for a tell-all interview, we won't know why an allegedly brilliant legal mind so badly bungled the highest stakes situation of his life.
Murdaughs don't really get told no much.
The Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution states that you don't have to take the stand in your own defense, and Alex Murdaugh knows this. Yet, as a tarnished defendant answering for the murder of his own family, Murdaugh chose to take the stand anyway. So why did he go on the stand? And why did his attorneys let him? Jurors who spoke to the media after the trial confirmed that Murdaugh's testimony had hurt him. He acknowledged lying about his whereabouts, claiming that he had not gone down to the kennels where he later found the bodies. Cell phone data disproved this story, and Murdaugh's initial attempt at deceit seems to have made him generally hard to believe. His former prominence also hurt him, with one juror commenting that she saw his testimony as just another iteration of the courtroom performances he'd given throughout his career. All families are different, but even with this caveat in place, it seems Alec came to his cousin with a big ask. Curtis Edward Smith was admittedly not just a distant cousin, but also a friend and former client, so Alec figured Smith was someone he could ask to shoot him in the head by the side of a rural road to fake his death in a botched carjacking. Roughly 3 months after Paul and Maggie's deaths, Alec's law firm had formally accused him of financial wrongdoing. Given that the jig seemed to be up, he wanted to die in a way that would allow his surviving son Buster to collect on a $10 million insurance policy. As suicide often voids insurance policies, Alec needed his death to be by someone else's hand, or at least appear to be. Smith was game, but the men with the stunt, leaving Alec shot in the head but still alive. Alec's tale of a carjacking fell apart under questioning. Smith maintained that while he had disposed of the gun, he had not shot Alec intentionally. The gun went off as he tried to wrest the weapon from Alec to prevent him from shooting himself. Both men would face charges in the incident, with Alec's insurance fraud count going in the big pile. One of the suspicious other deaths associated with the Murdaugh family was the demise of Gloria Satterfield, the family's long-term housekeeper. Satterfield fell and was injured at the Murdaugh family home in early February 2018, lingering a few weeks before dying on February 26th. Details of Satterfield's injuries are not publicly available, but the initial story, according to Alec, was that she had tripped over the family's dogs and fallen down the house's front steps.
A lot of people weren't really buying the whole dogs knocked her down the stairs narrative.
This later proved to be a lie, with a story concocted to get a bigger payout from the Murdaugh's insurance company. No autopsy was performed, and the coroner was apparently not notified of her allegedly accidental death on private property. However, her death certificate attributes her death to natural causes, not the accidental death Murdaugh described. Alec also attempted to swindle Satterfield's next of kin out of the settlement resulting from her death. He offered to look after her adult son's interests in discussions with the insurance company, but then never gave them any of the money he received. The Satterfield sons eventually reached a settlement with Corey Fleming, Murdaugh's friend and associate who had involved himself in the case, and ultimately received both the original payout and one from Fleming's firm's malpractice insurer. Stephen Smith was a 19-year-old nursing student when he was found dead in the middle of a road in rural South Carolina in July 2015. Smith's death was initially ruled a hit and run, but in the summer of 2021, South Carolina police announced that they would be reopening the case as a homicide, explicitly citing information they had uncovered in the investigation of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh's murders. Smith was openly gay, and both his mother and the Smith family attorneys suspect that his sexuality may have made Smith a target. News reports indicate that Buster Murdaugh, who had been a classmate of Smith's, was mentioned in witness interviews in the initial investigation, though he had not been charged as of mid-2025. Buster wasn't the only Murdaugh with a rumored connection to Smith's death, though. Alec's brother Randy, also an attorney, called the family and offered to help in the aftermath. Later, when Smith's mother drove by the area where his body was found, she saw Alec and Randy standing by the side of the road. There was no apparent debris from a car impact near or on Smith's body, and the sheriff reporting his death to his parents initially said he had been shot. A policeman on the scene has claimed that the corpse appeared staged, and unlike in most car impact deaths, Smith's clothing was undamaged and his shoes remained on his feet. The investigation continues. The prosecution in any murder case is not technically obligated to prove a motive, but realistically, their job is made much easier if they can point to a clear reason for a killing. Though the prosecutors were ultimately successful in the Murdaugh case, Alec's reasons for killing his wife and son remained open to speculation. During the trial, the prosecution argued that Murdaugh's house of cards was on the verge of collapse. His law partner had confronted him about his financial misdeeds and the walls were closing in. If Murdaugh could distract from his impending troubles by becoming the bereaved survivor of a decimated family, maybe the other problems would simply go away. If nothing else, he might buy himself some time. It's not a great plan, but Alec was decidedly not a clever strategist at this point. The official version remains unsatisfying, but it's what watchers of this bizarre case have to go on. The financial stresses that allegedly provided the motive for Alec's murders of his wife and son were colossal by most people's standards. If he and his family had been found liable in the boat crash lawsuits, he might have been on the hook for $10 million. Additionally, Alec had wrapped himself in a complex web of fraud schemes, bilking his employer and his clients alike.
There were plenty of times where I took money that I shouldn't have taken. There were plenty of times where I stole money.
Gloria Satterfield's death wasn't the only case in which Alec had lifted money. It turned out he had set up a dummy bank account made to look like it belonged to a structured settlement administrator, in which he had siphoned funds that belonged to his personal injury clients. This private account was also set up to receive litigation fees payable to Alec's firm, not to Alec himself, cutting the firm out of the financial loop. Alec had even pulled local banks into his schemes, with one bank executive, Russell Lafitte, found guilty of helping Alec conceal his financial misdeeds and allowing him to take out loans against accounts in his clients' names. It's a complex web of crimes to keep afloat, but it seems Alec needed the cash. According to The Independent, his drug addiction had gotten so bad that he was spending over $50,000 on opiates a week.
Plenty of horrific information has come out about convicted murderer Alex Murdaugh's actions on the night of his crimes, but his final text to his wife is truly chilling. Alex Murdaugh's final text to his wife was revealed at his trial. "Call me, babe," a common enough exchange for a married couple perhaps, but that text was sent nearly an hour after Murdaugh's wife died on June 7, 2021.
Alex Murdaugh, the privileged son of a powerful South Carolina legal dynasty, now a convicted murderer.
Murdaugh's last text to his wife is just one element of the alibi he tried to build surrounding the deaths of his wife and son, an alibi that he later admitted was fabricated. Once Maggie's phone was examined, it was confirmed that Murdaugh's last text to his wife was never read. Meanwhile, Maggie's phone yielded a trove of information crucial to the investigation. On the day of the murders, Maggie had been staying at a different home owned by the family and only went to the estate at the urging of Alec, who said his father was dying. She went reluctantly, reportedly texting a friend that his behavior was fishy and said he's up to something. Final text aside, Maggie Murdaugh's cell phone proved an important piece of evidence. Her phone was in airplane mode when she was killed, but the device still recorded its location information. It indicated that it was picked up repeatedly and moved some distance after she died, and that its orientation had also changed. After the murders took place, someone seemed to have tried and failed to use its facial recognition function to unlock it. After her death, Maggie's phone also received 3 unanswered calls from Alec before his last text arrived. In addition, Murdaugh made several other phone calls to those close to the family. Maggie's final, unread text from her husband was received 20 minutes before Murdaugh called 911 to report his wife and son were not breathing. WJCL published a timeline of all the phone transactions between Alec, Maggie, and Paul that took place on the day of the killings, along with the phone's movements. In many ways, it seemed like a typical day, until about 8:50 p.m. when Paul and Maggie stopped responding to any calls or messages.
The highly publicized Murdaugh case and subsequent trial exposed a string of mysterious deaths related to the Murdaugh family stretching back decades, as well as a history of substance use issues on Murdaugh's part. Many instances of financial fraud and embezzlement from the prominent family's legal firm and family fortune also surfaced. As well as those 2 murder convictions, Murdaugh was convicted on 2 counts of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. In their case against Murdaugh, prosecutors alleged he killed his wife and son as that history of financial malfeasance caught up with him. Also, according to the prosecution, Murdaugh's self-admitted addiction to opiate painkillers may have influenced his thinking. Murdaugh was 54 at the time of his conviction. He pleaded not guilty on all charges, according to CNN. At his sentencing hearing, while speaking with Judge Clifton Newman, Murdaugh referred to the memory of his murdered wife and son and suggested that the most long-lasting punishment for the crimes for which he is now convicted could instead be self-inflicted. At Alex Murdaugh's sentencing hearing, Judge Clifton Newman said, "I know you have to see Paul and Maggie during the nighttime when you're attempting to go to sleep. I'm sure they come and visit you." To this, Alex Murdaugh had a brief and chilling reply.
All day and every night.
In the first interview of its kind since the conviction and sentencing of Alex Murdaugh, the killer's brother, Randy Murdaugh, has opened up to the New York Times about what he thinks happened the night his sister-in-law and nephew were shot and killed. On the topic of his brother's guilt, Randy, who attended the University of South Carolina with his brother and did not testify at Alex's trial, told the New York Times he's still not sure who pulled the trigger. However, he said, "Alec knows more than what he's saying. He's not telling the truth, in my opinion." Though Randy Murdaugh worked alongside his brother Alec at the Murdaugh family law firm, the two had not spoken in roughly a year. In his New York Times interview, Randy explained that they were not exactly close. He said, "It's not like there was some problem with our relationship necessarily. We just really weren't alike, so we didn't do stuff together." In the weeks after Maggie and Paul Murdaugh were brutally shot and killed, Randy did everything he could to try and find out who murdered his sister-in-law and nephew. He explains, "I spent considerable time, day after day for weeks on end, calling people." But he claims the same could not be said for Alec, a fact that he found troubling. Those observations about Alec's demeanor after the death of his wife and son were corroborated by Maggie's sister, Marion Proctor, on the witness stand. Discussing the family's fears about the killers remaining at large, Marion said,
"I think everybody was afraid. Alec didn't seem to be afraid."
In contrast, Alec's surviving son Buster testified under oath that his father was, in his words, destroyed and heartbroken over the deaths of Paul and Maggie. Meanwhile, Alec had reportedly confessed to his brother Randy the embezzlement and other financial crimes, which he attributed to his opiate addiction. Shortly after that happened, Randy says Alec claims someone tried to shoot and kill him. He later confessed that he had paid his purported drug dealer, Curtis Eddie Smith, to try and shoot him in an act of assisted suicide. Smith failed, however. Despite Alex Murdaugh's conviction on the double murder of his wife and son, Randy still can't say for certain he's guilty. Despite all his faults, he said he'd only known his brother to be a loving and protective father. Randy's characterization of his brother's guilt, or at the very least involvement in the crime, diverges from what John Marvin, another Murdaugh brother, said on Good Morning America shortly after Maggie and Paul died. He said, "My brother loved Maggie and loved Paul like nothing else on this earth, just like he loves Buster, so there's no possible way he could have anything to do with this, I can assure you." Shortly after that, the Murdaugh family released a statement that read, "The entire family has been consistent that regardless of what goes on, we want the truth." In his 2023 interview with the New York Times, Randy said, "The not knowing is the worst thing there is. I hoped that after the trial, because there's nothing more that can be presented, that I'd stop thinking about this, but so far that has not been the case." How much would you pay for a convicted murderer's couch, or for a murder victim's monogrammed pillows? A recent auction caused a buying frenzy that proved just how much some true crime fans are willing to pay for a ghoulish souvenir. On March 3, 2023, former lawyer Alex Murdaugh was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murders of his wife Maggie and his 22-year-old son Paul. Murdaugh attempted to sway the jury by taking the stand in his own defense 10 days prior, but the plot backfired. Following the jury's verdict, Judge Clifton Newman delivered his sentence to Murdaugh, who maintained his innocence until the bitter end. In an attempt to pay legal fees for Murdaugh's trial, the Murdaugh family hunting lodge was put up for sale. WSAZ says the 1,700-acre estate in South Carolina, the location of the murders of Maggie and Paul, sold for $3.9 million. The sale also included all of Murdaugh's possessions on the estate, which since went to auction and had been strip-mined for cash. Items included holiday dishes, a fur coat, carved masks, a dartboard, and lots of kitsch.
It is on display in a way that no one really anticipates their life being on display.
These items and more from the Murdaugh estate went on sale starting March 23rd at 4 p.m. at Liberty Auction in Pembroke, Georgia. People reportedly drove to the auction from as far away as Virginia and Alabama. One auction goer told WYFF, "My mom has been following the Murdaugh cases for the past 4 years or so we figured this would be a good wrap-up to the trial." WYFF says the auction ended at 10:30 p.m. on the day it started, with every item sold, even this yellow crime tape. ABC News 4 lists several standout items and their outrageous prices. $1,300 for a popcorn machine, 7 turtle shell lamps for $5,400, and a set of longhorn antlers for $10,000. ABC News 4 reports that a set of leather furniture, 2 sofas, 2 chairs, and 2 ottomans sold for a whopping $30,000, and a single beer cozy went for $500. Liberty Auction owner Lori Mattingly described the scene to CNN as frenzy buying and said of the jaw-dropping prices, "That just proves people have more money than sense." Reporter Brooke Butler of WJCL News posted video clips from the auction site. The number of auctioned items is staggering. CDs, a wicker chair, old camouflage jackets, boxes of nails, a few fanny packs, a chandelier, vases of various sizes, silverware, cupcake tins, stacks of decorated dishes, tiny artificial Christmas trees, Halloween pumpkins, and sneakers and baseball caps that, judging by the type and style, might have belonged to Paul Murdaugh. One pair of khaki shorts even had Paul's brother's name Buster written on the waistband. And according to CNN, Maggie Murdaugh's monogrammed pillows were also auctioned off. Among the many hardback books for sale were 2 novels that someone with a dark sense of humor paired for a promotional photo. CNN notes that Robert Daley's Man with a Gun is about a man who commits an accidental homicide. The most notable item from the auction, however, might be its most unassuming, a framed poem. It's an altered version of some light verse called The Guy in the Glass, written by Dale Winbrow in 1934. It's more than a bit eerie, reading in part, "When you get what you want in your struggle for self, and the world makes you king for a day, just go to the mirror and look at yourself and see what that man has to say." The poem also talks about folks calling the man in the mirror a wonderful guy and a straight-shooting chum, but suggests the person looking back might just be fooling everyone. The eeriest stanza, however, is this one. "For it isn't your father or mother or wife whose judgment upon you must pass. The fellow whose verdict counts most in your life is the one staring back from the glass."